Sure.
Right. Okay. Live. Here we are. Right, that should be in the chat with you now. That's a live version.
Yeah, got it.
See. Remember to mute straight away. Get up to myself. Okay. So what can you see at the moment, Kev? You see everything fine on your end?
All looks good. Got a hello from Michael.
Perfect. Bear with us, guys. As you know, it takes a couple of minutes to get everything sorted, so we'll be with you shortly. Right. Got that image there. Right. Let's see what I see on my end. Right. Should be saved. Alright, okay. Let's see if I can get this link out on all our social media. Yeah, hi folks who are just joining us now. As you know, we're with Kev Gatland, who's a former Tornado GR4, but we'll get into it once I do my magic on social media. So, right, get that out there. So yeah, anyway, Kev, did you manage to get the dinner sorted and everything?
All sorted, and yeah, and the little den built as well. So yeah, it was all
Little
good.
den built, wow. Okay, you go in the space of an hour. Wow.
Good at multitasking, hey.
Well, you are a NAV, so yeah, of course. Right. Let's see if I can get this out. That's okay on my end. Okay, over here. That should be out now with our patrons. But yeah, hi Josh. How are you doing, mate? Right. Okay. So give me 2 seconds, folks, and I'll be with you. But yeah, Kev, what's been happening since the last time we spoke? I think it was early February, wasn't it?
Yeah, it has. Well, it's busy work, standard sort of stuff, I think. And just I guess just sort of muddling through like everyone else is doing at the moment. It's yeah, it's an interesting time, isn't it? And it'd be nice to finally pop out the other side with once we actually get out and do some get down the pub or something like that, which would be good.
Definitely, yeah. But so, what's the first thing you're going to be doing once we're allowed back into the wild, as it were?
Well, I think it will be catching up with mates I haven't seen for a year or so, and yeah, and just having a nice pub lunch and a couple of glasses of wine or a pint of beer or something like that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's just been such a long time, hasn't it? It feels like it's been, well, it has been a long time. Yeah, just over a year now.
Ages,
so.
Yeah. But before we get into it, have you ever been to the Eagle pub? Because I put something up on my Facebook the other day, but I love the Eagle pub. I don't know if you've been before.
Is that the one in Cambridge?
It is, yes.
Yes, I have, and it's the walls and the ceilings are incredible, aren't they? With all the markings and the like. If it's the same one I'm thinking of,
it is, yeah.
I've been a couple of times, but it's great. I like Cambridge. Cambridge is a cracking night out, actually. So
it is, yeah. And there's plenty of tornado stuff on the wall, actually, which is obviously a great thing to see. But yeah,
it seems to get everywhere. There's there's an awful lot of sort of memorabilia in all sorts of different places. I think I was in the Lake District a few years ago, and there was one of the pubs there had a bunch of prints on the wall and signed tornado prints and I think it was Jaguar prints, Harrier prints, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's cool. It's like home from home, kind of go to these places and then randomly see signatures that you recognise on the wall and things. So yeah, it's good.
Awesome. But yeah, as you know, folks who are just joining us now, we're with Kev Gatland. We interviewed him in February, and hopefully you enjoyed the two parts. The first part was on his involvement with the RAF Centenary Flypast over London, which was in 2018. And obviously the second part was your time on operations over Iraq and Afghanistan. But while the questions come in, Kev, can you just give us a brief overview of like how you started and where you are today? That'd be great.
Yeah, so it's for me, I'd always had sort of a passion, I suppose, for flying and aviation, and it started when I was probably in my early teenage years, and I suppose I got to the age of about 12, 13, and I wasn't quite sure whether I wanted to go military or civilian, but actually. I joined the Air Cadets as a 13 and 3 month year old, I think it was, and absolutely loved it. And the nostalgia for me about the Air Force and being an Air Force officer as well was actually really important. And then I was lucky enough to go through the selection procedure and end up going sort of Tornadoes, at the very end of it. Had a cracking career then, really, from about 2000 all the way through to the back end of 2019. And I saw one of the questions, what squadrons was I on? Bill, I was on 15 as the OCU, the conversion unit to start off with, and then I hopped across to 12 squadron. And Mike Wigston was one of my bosses actually on 12, who's currently the chief of the air staff. And then I moved back to 15 for a little while, did some instructional time there, and then 617, and then down to 31 squadron. So sort of bounced around both Lossymouth and Marham, and had a good selection of the squadrons as well, which was really cool. Then really I sort of finished my career in the Tornado Force headquarters, sort of as chief of staff for the last few years. And as one of that, which you mentioned, one of my roles there was project managing the RAF 100 Flypast, which was an absolute pinnacle of my career. And then once that was done, it was managing sort of from elements of the Tornado disbandment. So 40 years of the jet in service and sort of seeing that out of service was again something that was absolutely amazing as we kind of went into 2018.
Yeah, so guys, get your questions coming in for Kev in the side there, but I'm going to start off with one. Obviously you won a few squadrons. Like, how did it differentiate, like going from one squadron to the other? Was it like a different banter between all the crews?
Yeah, definitely. Between the air crew, between the ground crew, between the squadrons, between the bases, between the forces, it was really, really good fun, to be honest. It was always light-hearted and good-humoured, but it was you had I think when I started up at Lossymouth, there were four frontline squadrons and the OCU up there at that point. So it was really, really busy. Whichever squadron you were on, that was the best squadron to be on. And of course, you'd banter the other guys mercilessly, across the different squadrons. So it was great. It was a really, really good sort of sociable time, and you had great relationships with a lot of people, and it wasn't just between all the aircrew. You had great times with the ground crew. I remember being taken out by some of our ground crew for drinks, which inevitably ended up me being less or probably worse for wear by the end of it. Yeah. But no, it was great. It was really good fun, and lots of good banter, I think.
Well, brilliant. As you can see on the side there, Kev, there's plenty of questions to come in. And remember, you can scroll up so you can get everyone's questions. But guys, get your questions coming in, and hopefully you're going to enjoy this one. So Kev, enjoy, mate.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. Hard to see everyone. It's not I can see everyone, but good to see your questions come through, and I'll answer anything I can do. Eli, I've got one from yourself. So the comms side of stuff, we kind of changed actually over the years, and right at the very beginning we started off actually where the pilot did a lot of the sort of ground-based comms when the jet was on the ground, and then the nav would pretty much take over once you kind of either switched to departures or approach, and maintained a big chunk of the comms all the way through. That sort of swapped over a little bit later on in our career, where the pilot did a lot more of the communications, and the nav then sort of took over the tactical side of stuff. So what I mean tactical is more of the mission management side of things, when you're, say, talking to the, say, controllers on the ground, And the pilot tended to manage a lot more of the sort of air traffic control comms, but it was pretty flexible. Everyone could do both elements of it, but we tended to sort of split it up that way. So that's that one. Cool. Talked about the squadrons, which was great, having a variety of squadrons to go for. Swain, what was your thoughts on the RF 100 stickers they put on the tails of some of the RF aircraft? Were there ever any plans to do flypasts anywhere else other than London? The decals, I generally quite liked them, to be honest. I thought they were pretty good. It was nice to have something that was represented across every single, or vast majority of the fleets that we could put into the flypast. So it gave us the opportunity to have something that was sort of uniform, even amongst all the different fleets that were flying. In terms of flypast anywhere else other than London, the logistical nightmare of frankly of putting 100 plus aircraft in over one piece of sky at a particular time, and the disruption, and it was probably more the disruption rather than everything else, meant that it was pretty difficult to probably do multiple locations with large numbers of aircraft like that. So we ended up with 103 over London, but as part of that we also then wanted to touch on a couple of other areas. So we ended up actually having Heathrow, Hendon, and the memorial at Runnymede as part of the locations we could overfly, and they were kind of en route. Obviously we had Crammer as the practice fly past, and then the other one that we had was at Riyadh on the Friday, which was a 50 aircraft fly past, which unfortunately was cancelled due to the one and only thunderstorm that seemed to happen in 2018 over the summer, which was rather frustrating. But that was sort of the main bulk of it. It put a humongous amount of drain, I suppose, on the engineering resources to get all the jets serviceable. And a massive shout out to our engineering brethren. You see the aircrew that are flying the aeroplanes, and that's sort of the end result of the hours and hours and hours and days of weeks of effort that has gone into to get these jets serviceable and ready for the sortie on the day. So yeah, it was pretty difficult. Steve McLaughlin, who's your favourite Opsy? You were, buddy. You were my favourite Opsy. How are you doing? I hope you're really well. I didn't realise you were part of the channel, but good to see you. Good to see you. What are my future career plans? Thanks, Michael. You know what? I changed tack completely when I left the military. So I left in 2019. I thought I was going to go and do some sort of property-based stuff, or but in the end I didn't, and I decided to do something completely different. I got really into sort of finance and economics, and really wanted to understand a bit more of the world that I lived in terms of what happens around the world, especially having seen it from a military perspective and seeing a lot of the things that the military end up getting involved in and seeing. But I also want to see it from a I guess a political, financial and economic side of stuff. And as part of that, I ended up really, really enjoying it, to be honest. And then I thought, how can I work with people to put some of those things that I've learned and then over the course of my second career, help people out. So I've ended up going into financial advice and wealth management, which has been really, really interesting. I absolutely love it. Only Martin, have I ever stalled a Tornado with the wings folded back? No, thankfully. I've never been in a stalled Tornado. So we would have a min sort of indicated airspeed that we would routinely train down to of about 150 knots. And of course, you'd pretty much be, be in an air combat situation, we'd be in full reheat at that point, 25 wing, and almost certainly have the manoeuvres down as well. In terms of a recovery, if the wings are back, one of the first actions is stick the wings forward to 25. However, there are anecdotal rumours that it does recover from a stall quite nicely if the wings are in a swept back position. But certainly from all the, other than training in the simulator, I've never been in that situation. Thank God. That'd be pretty awful, quite frankly. Josh, good to see your message there. Currently in the Air Cadets, pilot in the Air Force. Struggle academically with my grades. What would be your advice? It's a difficult one, buddy. To be honest, it's And there isn't really an easy answer to that other than focus. You know, if that's your aim, and that was my aim when I was at school, and I wasn't a straight A student or anything remotely like that. You know, it's just determination and hard work. Really thinking about what your goal is, how much do you really want it, and how much effort you're willing to put in, because that kind of goes with so much of everything that you'll find, you know, and you will achieve it. I promise you, if you know if you put your heart and soul into it, and things like the resource of the internet, which wasn't around when I was a youngster as well, but looking at different ways of learning is something that is really important to have a look at. You might not learn particularly well if a teacher's at the front in front of a blackboard, whiteboard, or screen, or whatever they're using nowadays. You might work and learn in a very different way. So my advice would probably try and work out how you learn best. You know, is that by doing it? Is it by listening stuff? Is it by seeing stuff? And there's various methods of learning that aren't necessarily the way that school typically teaches you, and have a look at that, and then focus on keep your focus on what you want to achieve, is what I'd say there. Nick, have I got any brimstone experience? Promo vid showing a tornado ripple firing 6 or 7 at once looks amazing. Yeah, I do have some brimstone, but from some dual mode seeker brimstone experience. It is a fantastic weapon. The ripple firings that you're seeing may well have been during some of the trials that we did against some tanks that are out in the desert. You know, a fantastic piece of equipment, and one that is, you know, really good against those sort of targets. But yeah, I've had a DMS brimstone, but not an old school sort of legacy brimstone, which are the ones that you may have seen where there's multiples of them coming off. Clay, thanks, buddy. Good to see you too. Well, see your message anyway. I can see a little picture of you there. Hi there, Freckle Puny. Airlight simulators. Can a modern simulator ever be as accurate as the real thing? You know what? There was a time when I'd have said no, and I would have said I just don't think that we'll get there. But you know, with advances in AI, advances in the ability of things like the projectors and the so I guess the clarity and all the rest of it that can put into them, the latest sims are really good. And I think in many respects you're also able to do a lot more in the simulator than you could ever do, you know, for real. And that certainly was true with our Tornado sim. It was nowhere near as swept up as the latest sims. But you know, the latest sims you can do, you know, full war with all the different bits and pieces that are attached to your airplane, without compromise, I suppose. And that's where simulators really come into their own. You're able to practice for real, or as real as you can possibly get, using all of your equipment, which you can't always do outside, which is a shame. But could it ever be as accurate as the real thing? No, it's never going to be as accurate. But in terms of your training aid, you'll almost certainly be able to achieve far greater training in a simulator than you would do on many live type sorties. Which is top dog, Tornado, Buccaneer, F111 or the F15E? Well, I'm heavily biased, so I'm going to say Tornado, obviously. But you know what? They're all great. I mean, I had lots of buddies that flew Buccaneers back in their time, and I think that would have been a fantastic aeroplane to fly. I had one colleague of mine who was an F111 pilot, and I've known a few people that have flown the F15E, and we've had sort of guys go from the Tornado across to fly the F15E as well, and they've loved it. I mean, the amount of weapons and bits and pieces you can get on an F15E is quite amazing. But for me, I'm going to stick with Tornado. Right, P2089. Did most of the GR4 Wizards leave the RF when the jet retired to go to other types? Yeah, so a real mix. The Air Force and our manning departments, and a few people that were working at Marham at the time, and High Wycombe, spent a good couple of years, 2-3 years, working out not only where the Wizzos were going to go, but the pilots, the ground crew, the support staff that were all involved in the Tornado squadrons to sort of place them around the Air Force and as to where they wanted to go and where the Air Force needed them best. A big chunk of people did leave the Air Force when the jet retired, but a lot of that was just due to end of their times as well. And a fair chunk went on to other jets. So we had people go on to the Reaper, we had people go on to some of the bigger aircraft as well, and of course there's always staff jobs to be filled. So there was a good selection, and really thought there wasn't anyone that kind of left, I suppose, because there wasn't any job to go to as such. Which aircraft was Tornado originally designed to combat? Well, great question from that one. It wasn't really designed to combat any aircraft in terms of the original Tornado GR1. It was really designed as a low-level Cold War nuclear bomber. So this was a jet that fundamentally was going to take off from a strip in Germany, one of the air bases in Germany, fly deep into Russia, drop a nuclear weapon, turn around and probably not make it home. If I'm totally honest, the likelihood of there even being a base to come back to, if that was a scenario, was pretty remote. And a lot of the targets were so deep that they didn't really even have the fuel to sort of get back. Of course, over the years, and really the first major transition kind of occurred in the 1990s, where 1990, 1991, where you had the first Gulf War, and then part of that was looking at obviously using dumb weaponry initially, but then transitioning to the sort of medium level environment, so up at higher altitudes, and starting off with the sort of laser designation in the early class of paveway laser guided bombs. And of course, it's just evolved as it went through to the end where we had, in 2018, 2019, the most capable that the aircraft has ever been, employing some of the most advanced weapons that are out there. Paveway 4, Jormo Seeker Brimstone, and sort of Storm Shadow cruise missile were incredible bits of kit, very, very versatile. And you had an aircraft with two people in and a good fuel load that could do a lot of the you could do these missions really, really well. So it was more of a role rather than a particular aircraft that it was designed to sort of combat, I suppose. Hey Bill, does the nav have a joystick? It does. It does. So I mean, there are two versions of the jet, really, two main versions. One was the Strike version, and that had a joystick in the middle, a little small joystick, and the other one had it was a trainer version, which obviously had a stick and throttle, so you can control that. As in addition, the nav hand controller, which was in the centre, was sort of the primary, sort of controlled the radar and the targeting pod. So yeah, absolutely, it was part and parcel and integral to the sort of the system in terms of how it worked, in terms of you control a lot of the functionality via the control, or the little control stick in the middle. It couldn't be used to fly the aircraft or anything like. God forbid, they'd never let us loose. But it certainly controlled everything else, such as the radar and the weapon systems. How's Tornado's bombing system compared to the previous aircraft? Shad, do you mean the GR1 or previous other aircraft? I'll answer it generically, and maybe at the end I'll see if you mean GR1 versus GR4. I mean, the bombing system was relatively complex in terms of there was a number of different feeds of information that kind of fed the bulk of it, which was the main computer, and we had some great guys that designed the software for it as well, and it took in all sorts of feeds, air data, Doppler feeds, inertial navigation, and then latterly GPS data, but that didn't actually come till relatively late, and then all those sort of things got fully integrated eventually. So you ended up with a bombing system that was controlled at the beginning primarily by making sure that your barometric height or your radar altimeter height was accurate with reference to the target, and based on ballistic forward throws of dumb weapons, based on a whole bunch of data that just kind of gets smashed together in a big algorithm. through to the very end where we had, smart weaponry, where the weapon itself would have its own sort of basket that it had to be inside to be released, which matched up with the jet as well. So the jet knew and the weapon knew, and providing everything was good, then you'd have a sort of a good weapon solution. So it really did sort of change quite a lot, really, as the jet transitioned through the years. James, oh crikey, OASC, right? So for me, that was 20 odd years ago. But I think for me, the key bit about OASC is preparation. You're going to have an interview with the recruiters that are there. They're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions about the Air Force and the wider areas. You can absolutely do a lot of practice on sort of your mental arithmetic and speed, distance, time sort of calculations. You're also sort of put into sort of leadership scenario type positions as well. So just having to think about, if you've got a team of people around you, how would you be around them? What sort of things, how would you like to come across? So it's difficult to sort of pin down anything in particular, because of course everyone's got different strengths and different weaknesses. But sell yourself there. I think the phrase is, Air Force officer first, and then say pilot or nav, role second, and I think that's well worthwhile. And I think just demonstrating your commitment. Why is it you want to join the Air Force, and why not go do something else? And having really, really sort of strong answers to the sort of typical questions that, if you're going for a job interview, they're going to ask. I mean, I think the first question they asked me in my interview was, how old are you in years, months, and I think it was years and months actually, rather than years, months, and days. But that threw me immediately, because of course one, I wasn't expecting the question, and two, you had to do a little bit of mental maths. And the very first question that came through was, well, I'm 19 or 18 or whatever it was, and it's just to put you on the back foot. So just be aware of some of those questions might pop up, I guess. What percentage of the weapons were good old-fashioned dumb types? 0, absolutely 0. We did an awful lot of work on the range when we were up in at Lossymouth and also down at Marham, although not so much at Marham. But certainly in my early years, at 2000 to 2008 time, we were down the range probably every day. And we had little sort of 3-kilogram bombs, which were probably about this big, and 14-kilogram bombs, which were about that sort of size. And we used to go to the range and drop sort of 8 of those, or up to 8 of those, maybe even every day, or at least a bomb, or 2 every single day. So a lot of our practice was in sort of dumb weapons. And the little 3-kilogram bomb replicated a 1,000-pound retard. We call it a 1,000-pound retard bomb. So basically, had these big petals that came out that slowed the bomb down. You could drop them at low level, in a sort of level release, so the bomb ended up behind you, thankfully. Or the slick 1,000-pound bombs, which we could either drop from 15, 20,000 feet, or sort of do a loft, what we call a loft profile, where you sort of almost throw the bomb towards a target from about 3 odd miles away. But other than practice, we didn't do any, which is great news, because obviously the laser guided stuff and the GPS guided stuff was significantly more accurate than what we could do with those. Hi Nicholas, good to see you're online tonight. Yeah, and I think that's really true. Going back to those learning styles, how you learn, especially if you're going through that early years, and like school's a bit of a struggle and stuff. It's recognizing that people learn differently, and just because you don't get it about how the teacher's saying it doesn't really mean a huge amount. It's about, a lot of it is about the package of information that's been sent to you. You want to receive that in a different way. And I would, if you're struggling with things like that, well, I just don't get that, I don't understand why that works, I just explore different ways of trying to learn it. I think that's really, really important, and and recognizing that everyone's got different skills in different areas. Swain, I feel claustrophobic. You know what? As an aeroplane, Tornado was surprisingly spacious, especially when compared to something like a Hawk and something like a Tucano, which are the 2 previous aircraft types I've been on before then as well. The bit that I suppose you could end up feeling claustrophobic on was the fact that in the middle of winter and often into the summer as well, the sea temperatures would be at such a point that you'd end up wearing a great big thick rubber suit effectively, and then you had all your other kit underneath it and on top of it. So you ended up sort of walking out to the jet wobbling a bit, feeling like a Michelin man. And sometimes the jet would get pretty hot inside if you're working hard in a sortie. Then that could be pretty difficult with almost staying cool. Some of the jets were brilliant with their air conditioning, some were awful. It was a bit of luck of the draw sometimes with what you got there. But yeah, I mean, me personally, no, I didn't feel claustrophobic. I was pretty comfortable in the environment that I was in. I don't know if anyone did feel claustrophobic as such, but passengers, pardon me, PAX rides and stuff where you have people coming along, hop in the back seat if they weren't used to that, operating in that environment. People being sick was a fairly common occurrence, unfortunately. Do I think interceptors have got a place in modern stealth air forces? It's a really good question. It depends what you define as a stealth air force, I think, and therefore also what you define as an interceptor. And I think it leads probably on to how much of the highly expensive, high quality type of aircraft does an air force have nowadays versus the mass of aircraft. And the quality versus quantity debate has been one that's been raging forever, especially when you start looking at how few aeroplanes you might get for £100 million or £1 billion, for example. So I think, in terms of interceptors and other types of aircraft about their places, I think it's understanding what sort of threat your Air Force faces and what sort of threat your Air Force is likely to face in 20, 30 or 40 or 50 years. And that's a really, really difficult thing for the planners to kind of get their heads around as well. So I think there's a place for a wide variety of aircraft types, and there's probably got to be a method of intercepting an aircraft at some method, whether it's by range, in terms of the distance out, or if they're operating directly overhead you. And of course, as soon as someone puts something that's stealthy or a particular type of technology out, then there's normally a counter at some point over some period of time. So what may be stealthy today and seen as impossible to break, won't be in a number of years' time. And that's just kind of the way things and technology develops. And you think some of the best inventions during the Second World War were obsolete, very quickly, and some of the best inventions we had in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s are obsolete as well. I was going to cover the book at the end, but yes, it has, unfortunately. I think there's something to do with shipping problems of the book, but I'll touch that later on. Might have been something to do with the Suez Canal. In terms of the squadrons I served in, 617, 15, 12, and my last squadron was 31, where I was a flight commander on 31. All brilliant, all at different times of my life, obviously. So fantastic for all sorts of different reasons, which is great. Which aircraft other than Tornado would you have liked to have flown? Thanks, Bill. I think I was always a sort of a jet type person when I was younger, but I seem to really, really love the old World War One and vintage and historic aircraft now, and things like the old Sopwith Camel would be fantastic. I think if I could fly a Spitfire, who would say no to flying something like that? But I briefly had an opportunity where I was looking to apply to the BBMFs, the Battle of Britain Memorial flight, to join them for a little while. It didn't come off, unfortunately, due to various reasons. But the thought of flying in a Lancaster or the DC-3, and the history that sort of sits behind some of those would have been absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I think it's some of the older stuff rather than the newer stuff that I'd been most interesting. Douglas, hi Douglas. What's my favourite thing about being based at Lossy? The reason why I'm pausing is there were loads. If I'm honest, it was an incredible base in terms of the location for doing the type of flying that we were doing at that particular time. So in early 2000s, a lot of our flying was predominantly low level. I mean, there were some sorts we didn't really get above 1,500 feet, and that was only because we would have to go slightly higher as we left Lossy and slightly higher as we recovered. But once you're outside sort of 15 miles, we were down to 250, 300 feet all the way through for that hour and a half. And of course, when you're then as a 4-ship bounced by some F3s, say, that come in from Lucas, zipping in and out all of the valleys, the flying environment, the quietness of the airspace, the lack of other operators and civilian aircraft around meant that you could get some really, really, really good training in that area. So, the base itself was fantastic. Isolated. My family were all down south near, just north of London at the time, but it was isolated, but it also meant a lot of people stayed around. So socially, it's brilliant, really, really good. And like I said at the start, there were lots of squadrons, lots of people. And it was just a sort of a grand collection, I suppose, of professional stuff during the week, and then great sort of socials at the weekend and the like. Yeah, my scariest moment, Bill. Well, I think if you do one of them is on the internet. One of them is actually a picture of our jet on the internet where we landed at Lossy. I think it was 2003, and I think it might have been BBC News that covered it or something, but we were flying back from a sortie, and my pilot put the wheels down, and we had, I think it was the nose wheel came down and the two main undercarriage stayed up, with the doors sort of closed underneath as well. So when we tried to sort of get the gear down, blow it down with the emergency, the only one that came down was the left wheel. The right one stayed fully up with the door retracted. So we're in this sort of funny configuration of the nose wheel down, the left wheel down, and the right one still fully up. We had nothing on the outboard pylons by memory. So we'd normally have a BOS pod and a Sky Shadow pod at that sort of time. So there was nothing really what initially looked like was going to keep the wing up. We had a small 1,500 litre fuel tank on each of the underwing tanks. Thankfully, they were empty. But we kind of tried everything we could possibly do to get this wheel to come down. Bunting the aircraft, putting some sort of G onto it, up and down, and all the rest of it. But nothing was happening. So we ended up doing sort of a cable arrested recovery back on, I think it was runway 05 actually at Lossy. And as we touched down, Pete, who was my pilot at the time, did a cracking job and kept the aircraft within about a foot or so of the centre line. But as we came to a halt, the thing that didn't happen, which I thought was going to happen, which was the wingtip was going to be scraping down the runway, and could that drag us off to one side, and could we end up in this horrendous situation of the aircraft almost flipping over? That didn't happen, but what did happen was the fuel tank then ended up sitting on the runway and scraping down it as we sort of slowly ground to a halt with the cable behind us. Pete shuttled the engines down, fire extinguishers, all the necessary sort of emergency things. And as the canopy came up and I stood up, I just saw this huge sort of ball of flame that erupted from the right hand side, which was pretty scary at that point. And obviously that was a hole basically made in the fuel tank, and the final vapors and bits of fuel in the bottom of that ignited and then sort of caused that small fireball. At that point, the firemen had just about arrived and had started spraying with the great big monitor, from their fire truck. And then the next bit was as sort of went up the wing, which is now sticking up into the air, and looked down, which was sort of, I felt like 100 feet in the air. It wasn't, but it felt that high. Looking down with all your kit on, thinking, well, I've just got to get off this airplane because it's currently on fire, So it was then jumping down and then sort of running away from the aircraft bravely whilst the firemen sort of sprayed the aircraft down and the like. So that was probably a pretty hairy moment there. Freckle Peony, the view from the back seat, you're right, it is inferior to the F-15E. You can't see anything directly forward. You've got the radar in front of you, then you've got a sort of an instrumentation block which sits above that. So, and then you've immediately in front of that you've got the front seat, ejection seat, and the like. So you can't actually see anything when you look directly forward. You kind of got to crane your head either side, sort of down the quarter lights, and you can see down there. So the view is certainly from that perspective is poor. The Hawk's amazing when you can in comparison you could see everything really, really well, but obviously designed for a very different job. And then of course you look left and right, and you've got the two great intakes which sit either side of you, which are a beam view, so you haven't got a great view out there either. So the view is not as good as something like the F-15, but you make do with what you got at the end of the day. It's not too bad. Paul, great question. Was the processing power of the computers comparable to a modern iPhone? Oh my word! No, it's. I'm trying to think what it had the processing power of, and I think it was something like a 56K Spectrum. So I mean, bearing in mind this jet was designed in sort of the 60s and 70s. First came into service, I think it was 72. Or first flew 72 and then came into Air Force service in 82. The computing power behind it was nowhere near as capable as probably a modern day calculator, to be honest, let alone an iPhone. But it did exactly what it needed to do. Over the time, we ended up getting sort of upgrades. We then got another computer, called a CSG, a computer symbol generator, which was put in, which worked alongside the main computer in the jet. And then latterly we had something called the TARDIS, which kind of came in, which is a sort of a combined radar display, and eventually became our Link 16 display, which had some degree of computing power as well. But as a whole, we were woefully short in computing power, unfortunately, which is a real shame. Did I get to take the controls in the T-bed? Yeah, regularly. When we flew trainer sorties, I think it was. It's always good fun just to have a little go in the back and demonstrate how marvelous I was at flying the aeroplane. But yeah, it was great. It was good to have a little go as well, and it was also from it was valuable, I think, sometimes, because you could do some of the fly it and feel how the aircraft would fly, and you just kind of got that perspective of how it's sort of how the front seat is operating with it as well. We also did some sort of reverse seat rides in the simulator, and that was really good. So nav would jump in the front and the pilot jump in the back, and again, really valuable training, because we could then see each other's jobs. And certainly when an emergency sort of came in, you could then see what the pilot was seeing, because our cockpits were slightly different. Our central warning panels for all of the emergency tags were slightly different as well. So you got to see, if you had a generator failure, for example, or a TBT caption or something like that, exactly what the pilot would see. And of course, when you then took that experience into the back seat, you'd have a much better visual idea of what was going on at that point. And you also knew when the pilot was going to be busy, so when to be quiet. That crew resource management was something we did an awful lot of work, and that helped that hugely. Airlight, can you talk us through the process onto the basket and what was your role during it? Yeah. So the pilot essentially got to a position normally about 6 to 12 feet behind the basket. Our role up to that point was predominantly finding the tanker on radar, assisting with that in the run up to it, and then sort of reading through the checks. Although to be fair, most of the pilots knew these off by heart, so it was more of an exercise just to make sure nothing had been missed rather than anything else. And then once you were sort of in that line of stern position of it, the idea was the pilot would just focus on a reference point directly ahead, and he or she would listen to the backseater guiding them with sort of up, down, left, right type commands. The reality is that have a little look at the basket as you were talking, and you might be saying something like upright, miss left, and because some guys would focus on your voice and others would just focus on the basket, and it works sometimes and it doesn't work others, but the technique was the nav would talk the pilot onto it. I would like to say that navs always did perfect talk-ons, and as I'm on the interview, I can say that was always the case. Can you estimate the faith level attained in your pilot? I'm thinking you're sitting heads down the back at night, 200 feet, poor terrain. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I think when we talk about trust nowadays, and do you trust someone, rarely you're in the position where you are often genuinely entrusting your life that they're going to make the right decisions, they're going to do the right things, because these things, as we find, can go from perfectly fine to incredibly bad, and the worst case scenario in almost a a split second, or it certainly feels like it's a split second. And there've been plenty of opportunities where we'd be flying along, and it would be a sort of a low arousal state. So 15,000-20,000 feet on a cruise, nothing much is going on. You just got air traffic in the background. Your next turning point is 100 miles away, and then something bad happens. And there's a huge amount of trust in your front seater that one is going to, if it's an emergency side of stuff, he's going to crack through the right actions, not shut down the wrong engine, or do something that's going to make the situation worse. And I think that is reciprocal as well, because the back seater will be backing a lot of this stuff up with the emergency cards, for example. But in terms of sort of the low level environment, absolutely. I mean, you're often in a at night you could be down at 250 feet, 500 feet. You could be on the night vision goggles. Very difficult to see out the front, and you are absolutely trusting that your pilot is content with the flight path of the aircraft. That we're not going to suddenly come around the corner and there's going to be a wall of fog and he's not going to know what to do. Of course, that's unlikely to happen. But the skill level in some of these things are very very high. And the training to get to those levels is very, very high as well. But of course, everyone's got to start somewhere, and even in the training areas, it's you've got to start with your first night vision goggle sortie, where you're with an experienced backseater or an experienced pilot in the back. But yeah, I think you do build up a high level of trust, and certainly when you're in operations with somebody as well. You fly with them very, very regularly. You get to know them very, very well. You can bounce stuff almost without speaking to each other. You know what the other person's doing. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the trust that I had in the guys that I flew with, it was very, very high. And you have pretty terse words, frankly, when they break that trust, and that absolutely works the other way as well. There's no shying away in the debrief, or if something didn't go right that you wanted it to go right, that it's a high stakes game, ultimately. So you need people to be performing at their absolute best. Freckle Puny, current size of the Air Force, do I think it's too small today? That's a question, isn't it? It depends what you want it to do, I think, is the answer. If you want it to go and do what it used to do, then yeah, absolutely. Could we go and do another Gulf War I, the size of what we did then, or the weight of effort that we put out to these things? Then yeah, absolutely, it's too small. But I think we also had a very different structure. We had a very different funding profile. The world sort of world picture, I suppose, was very different. The aircraft types were different. So do I think it's too small today? I can't really answer that if I'm honest with you, because I think it depends what the politicians ultimately want the Air Force to do for them. I mean, ultimately, if you said, look, we just want you to be a small UK-based defence force with a bunch of Typhoons operating on North and Southern Q, and that's it, you could end up with something very, very small. If you still want a big punch around the world, then ultimately you've got to put in either weight of effort or experience and quality of effort, and often they go sort of hand in hand as well. So it is small. The aircraft types, as you know, something like an F-35 is incredibly expensive, but the capability it gives you is incredible. Would we be better having more Typhoons? I don't know. It really depends on I guess what you want the force to do, and how much you want it deployed around the world. Because of course it's not just about aircraft types and numbers of aircraft. It's also about the personnel. I mean, you can have thousands of aircraft and not enough people to run it, and that's another thing, is getting enough people to want to do this for over a period of time, and enjoy doing it over a period. So you can sort of deploy the force around the world, but ultimately, like all these things, it's political. It's up to our politicians to decide how they want to use the military. Nick, full NBC kit. Oh, thank God I'd never had to operate in full NBC kit. It was really, really challenging, to the point of, I think our initial training, we had the AR5, which was the sort of NBC sort of respirator and little box you'd carry out to the aircraft, and it was essentially this great big rubber hood that went all the way over your neck. It went sort of halfway down your chest, over your shoulders, back, and there'll be some funny little breathing device out the side, and all the rest of it. Horrific, frankly. And then they made us jump in swimming pools with it, and be able to take it off in case you ejected with this thing on. I think had it needed to be used sort of for real, it would have been a very, very uncomfortable experience. And I think prior to my time, when they did sort of have it, probably back in the GR1 days, I don't know for certain, but I believe navs could fly with it, but pilots weren't allowed to, because it was considered pretty risky even back then. So thankfully it was gone by the time I arrived. G-Lock. Thanks. Is that Jack? Yeah, Jack is smiling. So no, I've not had G and G Schlosser consciousness. Thankfully, I've had the I've had the sort of stars come in, the vision, sort of that tunnel vision, come through to where it is pretty small, and there is a focus on preventing that. And understanding it, but for our jet, to be honest, we rarely went above 4G on a standard sort of training sortie, and even if we were sort of clean and in air combat, I think we would probably maybe touch 5.5 or 6G at absolute tops. So relatively, it wasn't that much. However, we all went through the same procedures back in those days. And again, it's different now for Typhoon pilots, and I can't speak for F-35, but I'm sure it's pretty similar to those guys as well, in terms of the centrifuge training, which we didn't have. So we went through RAFCAM, which was the Centre for Aviation Medicine at Henlow, and at that time it was based around sort of straining procedures, making sure you're appropriately using your leg muscles, your stomach muscles, your calf muscles, and all the rest of it, and also pre-preparing. So the pilot would often, if he was able to, and he was going to enter sort of one of these hard G turns, sort of make a call and G coming on or something like that, for two reasons. One, you get your neck in the right position, because if you're looking over your shoulder and you snap some G, that can be pretty painful, and also so you can start your tensing early. The G suit normally kicked in about 2G, so you'd know as the G went up, your G suit sort of started pressing into your stomach and legs as you kind of went through there. But yeah, it's and really the last point you make is you're not directly flying it, and that does make a difference, because of course you're pulling the or the pilot's pulling the aircraft around, so you're naturally tensing as you do that, whereas you're a little bit more reactive, I think, as the back seat. Yeah, and I think Paul, your question about that max instantaneous G, typically you do 4G. If you're air combat, you might try and snap as best you can to sort of those higher levels I've just discussed. But to be honest, the jet bled off so much speed that even in max reheat, it'd be very difficult to, or even sort of combat power, which is the absolute max we get out of the thing. The jet would just bleed speed off very, very quickly. Completely unlike something like a Typhoon, where you can hold much higher levels of G with the excess power that thing's got available. We just didn't have that, unfortunately on our jet. Bill, my longest non-stop flight was I think 8 hours actually. The jet was limited in our books to sort of 8 hours of flight, and that was predominantly due to the oil consumption. It could go for longer, and jets did go for longer. And I think for a period of time we did experiment a little bit with sort of I think they called it filter spill back in the day, where the engineers would monitor the engines, work out which were the good ones in terms of oil rate consumption. Then you could fill the oil up to pretty much the max levels, in accordance with their docs, and then the jet could probably go for 11 hours or so. But typically after about 8, you'd risk getting an oil pressure caption as the engine sort of nominally burnt away. I think it's about a litre of fuel an hour, something like that, or a pint of fuel an hour. But 8 hours was pretty much our standard that we did. But that's a long time, strapped in that jet, with all your bits and pieces on, and needing a wee and not eating anything, and all the rest of it, or having sort of chocolate bars, rations, and a bit of water. It wasn't the most comfortable, I must admit. And in terms of weight and iron bombs, we used to be able to carry we did eight. The jet could carry sort of, I think it was 8,000 pounders was a typical one under sort of twin store carriers back in the day. But again, I think after a period of time they got phased out, and we ended up with the maximum we would end up carrying is 5 1,000-pound bombs for that side. The Storm Shadow is pretty heavy. They weigh about 1.3 tons or so each. So we could carry up to 4 of those, 2 in the 2 under fuselage, and take the fuel tanks off the wings and stick 2 there. So you could end up with a very, very heavy aeroplane, and add then the fuel on top of that, which that would be another just under 5 tons or so. You'd end up with a pretty heavy aeroplane for takeoff. Nick, good. The more interviews I watched, happier I feel at paying taxes. Absolutely. Did you know, as a fun fact, the Tornado at max reheat at sea level would burn about 600 kilograms of fuel a minute, which was ridiculous when I worked out how long that I'd run my little car for. But taxes pay for that as well. Paul, what would I do differently if I had my time again? I think my silence says it all. I don't think I'd do anything differently, actually. I genuinely and thoroughly loved my time in the Air Force, and I was very, very fortunate. I think going through the selection procedure, getting through flying training, getting onto squadrons with some great people. So I've had a thoroughly enjoyable sort of 20 odd years in the Air Force, which was amazing. So I think it's a bit of a cop out, isn't it? But I think I'd rerun it as it was. I think it was great fun. Top speed I got to in a Tornado. Thanks for Echo Puny. I think I got to Mach 1.05. I think it was. So we were limited to Mach 1.2. It used to be, you've probably seen on documents of Mach 2.2 aircraft, but that was back in the early days when everything was completely straight and had perfect engines, and importantly the ramps operated inside the engine intakes. After a period of time, those ramps were disabled. Which had essentially the effect of not slowing the air down as it would hit the front compressor, and therefore supersonic air hitting the compressor of the air engine is not typically a good thing. So we were limited to Mach 1.2. So I managed to get to, I didn't. I sat there. My pilot got me to 1.05, and it was surprisingly smooth. We kind of went through the altimeters and flicked around a bit, but there wasn't any noise or anything crazy. So it was interesting.
So yeah, Kev, we've got 5 minutes left, but if you want to answer, a couple of more questions, and then we'll wrap up this Q&A and talk about your book. That'd be great.
Yeah, great. Airlight, I left at the right time. I left at, for me, the pinnacle when I was loving it. So for me, I left the party at exactly the right time. I've been Tornado through and through. When Tornado went out of service in March, that pretty much coincided with me leaving as well, having done the RAF 100 Flypast the year before, and managed, worked with a lot of the guys sort of, working with the disbandment. So it felt very fitting at that point for me to leave, and it's been great. Highest altitude, I can't remember. I think it was just over 40,000 feet, 42, 43. We didn't stay there. It was a full reheat zoom climb, just about scraped it, and then came straight back down again. It wasn't a great aircraft for operating anywhere above that sort of thing. And yes, we could interface with other aircraft via Link 16 as well. The strangest switch or feature of the aircraft, I suppose, was probably a front seat thing as well. You had to go via air-to-air guns first before you could access missiles, which would seem completely the wrong way around, because you typically want to go for missiles first for a long-range shot or relatively long-range shot, and then switch to air-to-air guns. But you had to go through air-to-air guns first, which seemed a strange way around. And Paul, Middle East, not for me. No, I did a bit of time out there, but frankly, it was too hot for me. I'm a I'm a befreckled, slightly gingery haired sort of bloke, so it would have burnt me to a crisp, I think, if I spent too long out in the Middle East.
But
I
yeah,
think that's all
brilliant
I.
there. Yeah, brilliant there, Kev. But yeah, let's talk about a bit about your book because it's been delayed slightly because obviously we know what's happened on the Suez Canal. Maybe that's got
Yeah.
something to do with it. But it's the RAF Centenary Flypast. Tell us about this and where we can order it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. And it's been great to chat to everyone today. And yeah, so I mentioned a couple of times that the in 2018 I was given the enormous privilege of project managing the RF 100 Flypast. And as part of that, subsequently, I ended up doing a fair few sort of speaking bits and pieces to various organisations, and there was always that task of collating the amount of information that we had together, the challenges, the difficulties, the conception of it, and also the huge variety of photos and map images and things like that came out. And I wanted one place just to sort of pull it all together. And someone suggested that it'd be a great idea to write a book. So I did, and it was something that I'm sort of really proud of now to have taken the time, I suppose, to pull all this stuff together. There's some fantastic photos, over 150 pictures of the day, of of the briefings, of some of the maps, some of the images, some of the airspace we use, and of course of the aircraft flying during the day, and stuff that hasn't really seen the light of day since that time. So yeah, I spent about a year or so collating it all, speaking to people, writing a book. The old chief of the air staff, Sir Stephen Hillier, very kindly wrote the foreword for it as well, and you may well have come across John Nichol as well as part of the aviation scene. He's written a bit on it from himself, which has been great. Yeah, and it kind of brings the story of the RF, the backstory of how the Flypast came together, the challenges we had, everything from how long we had to close Heathrow for, and the negotiations of doing that, through to the various type of contingencies and bits and pieces that we had to think about. Everything from thinking about terrorist attacks on the day through to engine failures and single engine aircraft over London. So it's quite comprehensive as to what goes into these things. So hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I did writing it. And it's available at the moment on Pen and Sword, who are the publishers that are publishing it, as well as Waterstones, Amazon, and various other sort of outlets as well.
Well, brilliant, yeah. So all the people in the comments here, I've put the link to pre-order Kev's book in the description, so hopefully you can go and get that. I'm sure it's going to be a massive success, Kev. But thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and really good to sort of answer the questions today. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you very much for all you guys coming in the comments there. And I'm sure we can get Kev back on if I can twist his arm. I'm sure once the book's released, we'll get yourself back on. So thank you very much, Kev.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.